Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah. Turn off the audio. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We're just going to give people a couple minutes to join here, and then we'll get started. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll give a proper intro in a second, but when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll go through all the questions you've got. So yeah, just let us know what's on your mind. Yeah. Okay, we'll start at 5 past exactly. So just sit tight for a sec here. Hey Pat. Hey Pat. You ready? Okay, let's get going. So welcome to the first town hall we're doing. We're going to call this kind of a soft launch dry run. So thank you for joining at short notice. If you don't know me already, I'm Graham Smith. I'm running for the Board of Supervisors here in District 3 in San Bernardino County. And if you've met me before, hopefully you find out a little bit more about me, the platform, what I'm all about. And if you haven't met me yet, I hope you learned something new. Just early housekeeping. Any questions? Feel free to drop them in the comments, and we will have a proper Q&A period at the end. We were still figuring out what platform we want to use for all this. So if it works at some point to have Zoom and have people on camera and do a two-way thing, we'll do that. But Facebook and YouTube Live just give chat interaction. So please drop any comments in the chat, and we'll get through them at the end. Just in case we have a blackout, we've been getting texts from Edison today saying they're doing some maintenance in our area. We do have a backup generator. We're out in the middle of nowhere, so give us like 30 seconds and we'll be back up and running. So with that, let's get into the presentation. We've got a little presentation prepared that I'm going to run through for you, and then we'll run through that and get on to Q&A. So let's switch over to the PowerPoint here. God, I feel it's been a while since I've used PowerPoint, so please bear with me as we go through this. So we're going to structure this presentation into a couple different sections. I want to talk about what the role of a county supervisor actually is. I'm going to give you some background on me, my personal experience, my professional experience, and why I think I'm the right person for this job. Then I'm going to spend some time talking about my priorities for the county overall. And tonight is focused on the desert areas, But if you're interested, we're going to do these town halls for each of the urban, mountain, and desert areas we have here in District 3. So let's get into it. What does a county supervisor do? We think about this in 4 main areas: approving the budget, allocating resources, approving legislation, and securing investment. So running through one by one. The budget for this county is pretty big. It's almost $10 billion in 2024. So the supervisor needs to have financial literacy and be comfortable dealing with numbers of this size and scale. 2, supervisor has to figure out how to allocate resources across the county departments. The county is kind of like, in some ways, it's like a collection of a bunch of businesses. You have dozens of departments in this county, all focused on something slightly different. They all need resources, they all need money to thrive, but they all work differently. And the role of the supervisor is figuring out how these departments work and what they need to be the most effective. 3, legislation. Now, a lot of the supervisor's role is really interpreting legislation that is passed down from the state of California or the federal government. But one thing that's important here is being able to identify areas and respond to information quickly. I've been to plenty of Board of Supervisors meetings at this point, and it's really important that when something comes across your desk, you're able to respond quickly to it and make an informed decision. And last but not least is securing investment. We need to build relationships not just with the state and federal governments, also within private industries in the county, and a huge part of the role of the supervisor is securing that investment. And I think it's important here to realize most of our budget, not most of, but the single biggest piece of our budget in San Bernardino County is a reimbursement from the state of California and the federal government. So being able to pitch people on why San Bernardino is a good investment opportunity is a really important part of this job. So let me tell you a bit about me and my personal background. So I was born and raised in Southern California. If you know where Topanga is, it's just outside of LA in the Santa Monica Mountains. So I'm a mountain person by birth, I suppose. And I've been connected to San Bernardino my entire life. So we're sitting here in my living room. I'm living in a cabin my grandparents built 50 years ago. I've been coming to this very house my entire life. I've actually got a strong connection to all of the regions of District 3. We have a family campsite down in Lucerne Valley. I learned to rock climb with my dad in Joshua Tree. So even though I haven't always lived here full time, I've had a lifelong connection to San Bernardino County, and in particular, all the areas of District 3, which I'm now running to represent. And I'll talk about this when I talk about my professional experience, but I haven't always lived, we know I haven't always lived here. I also haven't always lived in the US. I spent 12 years of my life living and working in London, and I think that experience has really kind of formed me as a person, and I think I bring a breadth of professional and life experience to this role that I'm pretty confident you're not going to see in anybody else. I went to school at USC. You can love me or hate me for that, but I studied business and accounting. So I do have a business brain, and that's what I spent a lot of my professional career doing. And just a bit about me personally, I like to cook, I like to tinker in my workshop. If I get any free days as part of this campaign, I'll probably drive down to Snow Valley and get a couple ski days in. But I'm just a normal guy. That's the main takeaway. So my reasons for running. I want you to know I never had any aspirations to be a politician. This was not part of my life plan. I'll talk a little bit about why I'm doing this, but I think it's important to know that this has never been my entire career. My life hasn't been building up to this, and I think that motivation is really important. So one of the things that happened when we moved full time to Lake Arrowhead was we started noticing how dysfunctional this county can be. Whether that's basic local services like trash pickup. I mean, if you're a mountain or desert resident, you can probably sympathize with some of this. We live up a little access road. The county doesn't pick up our trash, even though we pay for it. So we have just personal issues we deal with on a day-to-day basis. We see people struggling to make home improvements, and especially in a rural part of this county, we see people really struggling to open small businesses. And I think that's a problem when you're in a rural community small business is such an important aspect of day-to-day life. It is the lifeblood of our community, and seeing how difficult the county sometimes makes it for people, I think is really disappointing. So these are some of the things that I want to fix. And for me, I think the main driver for running and the time that I actually thought about doing this properly was during the snowstorms last year. So if you're a mountain resident, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not a mountain resident, you probably saw some stuff on the news or read about it in the newspaper. But last year we got dumped on with 10 to 12 feet of snow in a week. We were all stuck in our houses. And the county wasn't saying anything about what was going on. So after 4 or 5 days of not hearing anything, we all started getting frustrated, and it wound up taking a coordinated social media campaign to get the attention of Don Rao, the supervisor I'm now running against. I'm happy to say it worked. We got some more communication, we got some resources. I really led the charge on the communication side of things. I led a big Zoom call with over 1,000 residents up here, the head of pretty much every major county department. And through that whole storm experience, I spent a bunch of time on the phone with Don and other people in the county, and that's when I realized that I really thought I had something to offer here. So that's kind of the background to how I got to where I am today and why I'm considering this run for the first time in my life. I want to spend a few minutes talking about my professional background because I think that's really important here. And in a second, I'm going to talk about how that really goes back to the role of the supervisor. So I've got two sets of professional experience, both my corporate experience in big finance and then my small business experience actually running a couple small businesses of my own. So when I was in my finance career, I worked for 2 big companies. You might remember the famously defunct investment bank Lehman Brothers from back in the day. That was actually my first job out of school. So I graduated USC in 2005 and worked there until about 2008. And then I spent most of my career at an LA-based investment company, but in their London office called Ares Management. And there were two main aspects to that job that I think are really directly relevant to the role of the supervisor. One, it was my responsibility to go out and pitch my company to people, kind of like pitching San Bernardino. I would have to go out to investors and raise money for my company fund. That would all go into a big fund, and then it was our job to take that money, figure out how to allocate those resources, how to invest that money across a bunch of different companies, across a bunch of different sectors. And through that process, we obviously made some money for our investors, but we also helped make companies better. We helped create jobs. And really, if I think about the role of a supervisor, allocating county resources across a bunch of different departments, it's very similar to the experience I had allocating funding across a bunch of different companies. Then on the small business side of things, I founded 2 small businesses. I decided I didn't want to work corporate work forever. I was also living and working in London. I was ready to come back to LA. So I moved back here, and since moving back, I've founded 2 small businesses. One is an online health and fitness app, and the other is a skincare brand. And through that experience, it really helped me understand the challenges day to day of being a small business owner. I mean, you can imagine, especially if you own a small business, it's a very different experience from working in a big corporate. And then certainly being up here in a rural part of San Bernardino County and in the mountain communities, we've seen firsthand just how hard it is to open a business in San Bernardino County. And to the point before about small business being the lifeblood of a small community, I think that firsthand experience really allows me to empathize with some of the challenges that small business owners face, across the country, but in particular in San Bernardino County and in the rural parts of our county. So let's go back to the role of the actual county supervisor, and I want to talk about how my professional experience is really directly relevant. So 1, we have approving the budget. This county's budget is $10 billion. It's a lot of money. Just to give you a feel for the scale of the projects that I used to work on, I personally raised and invested $10 billion for the group of the business I used to work in. And the company I used to work for now manages $400 billion. So we're talking really big numbers. So these are a $10 billion budget is something I've got a lot of comfort with, and dealing with multi-million-dollar spend is something that is absolutely in my wheelhouse. And I think one thing that's important, and one thing that I think gets lost in a role like this, is as a person responsible for budgeting, you need to look both at the top level, kind of top down at that total $10 billion spend, and you also need to look bottom up. Because ultimately, if you've attended a bunch of Board of Supervisors meetings, you'll know that a lot of what gets approved is, a couple $1 million to spend here or there, and all that stuff adds up. And unless you're focused on each one of those contracts and you know how it all comes together, it's really easy for stuff to slip through the cracks, and all of a sudden your budget isn't balanced anymore. So through my corporate experience, I have a lot of experience doing both that top-down and bottom-up approach. Allocating resources. I talked a second ago about how I used to raise money and invest that money in companies. The way I see it, it's similar to the way the counties run, which is where you are allocating the county's resources across a bunch of different departments. This county is formed of dozens of departments. Like I said, they each require their own funding and resources to work the best. One of the things I spent a lot of my time doing in my previous job was understanding how companies work, figuring out what makes them tick, and then figuring out what they need to make things better. I'm sure you've probably all read some of the news around various departments in this county. Some of them seem to be well run, some of them seem to be quite poorly run. There's I think seems to be a famous Child Protective Services division that people have said is too broken to fix. A huge part of the job I used to do was not just investing this money in companies day to day, but spending time with them, getting really involved, sitting on their boards, and figuring out what needs to happen to make things better. So my agenda, if elected to this supervisor position, is really spending time with all these various county departments and figuring out what they need to operate the most effectively. 3, approving legislation. So as you can imagine, I've now spent a lot of time attending and going to Board of Supervisors meetings. And I've seen firsthand the speed at which you need to be able to operate. And I think this is one area where we are falling short as a county and where we have an opportunity to improve. Because I've seen firsthand some decisions made with what, from my perspective, I would call isn't the right amount of information, not the right amount of challenges or questions asked. And I think this is a huge area of opportunity improvement for us. And one thing, if you know me at all, if you follow the campaign on social media, one thing I've actively tried to do as part of this process is be really diligent on issues, respond quickly, and really give you an honest feel for what I think. I think that's the most helpful thing I think I can do as a candidate to this role, because it's going to give you a view in terms of how I think about issues and how I'm likely to respond. So a good example of that is STRs. Pat, I know you're on the line. I know STRs are a hot button topic for you. The county released its STR report probably a month ago now. Within a few days, I had been through that report, digested it, and produced a full piece of opinion content on it. And if you haven't watched it yet, it's on YouTube. Go check it out at some point. From my perspective, I haven't seen other supervisors get into that level of detail, and I certainly haven't seen other candidates do that either. So look, I know this is part of an evaluation process for you, figuring out who to vote for. So as you're evaluating your candidates for this race and others, I'd encourage you, push people, ask for an opinion, and ask for an opinion in a reasonable time frame, because this is what the job actually entails. And if we're just getting political sound bites out of people, then I think we can reasonably expect that to continue when those people are sitting on the board or whatever position they get elected to. So this is one thing I'm really trying to focus on for you. Lastly is securing investment. Again, big part of my role in my previous job, going out and raising money. In this county, it's important to, well, this county and any county, we need to raise investment both from the state of California and the federal government, and also work with the private sector to bring investment back to this county. I'm going to talk in a bit about some of my plans for economic diversity here, but knowing how to work with the private sector and attract money here, I think is a really important part of this job. I mean, I went to the county's State of the County presentation a couple months ago, and on one of the panels, a couple of the representatives were talking about the fact that so many county employees don't speak the language of business, and it's really hard for them to get stuff done. I think one of the things I really bring to the table here is the fact that I do speak the language of business, which means I know how to talk to people to bring investment back to San Bernardino County. It also means I know how to stand up to companies when I think they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. So I think that experience here is actually quite helpful, and it's something that I think I can do certainly better than other candidates in this race, and indeed probably better than most of the supervisors we have on the board today. So I'm running for District 3. If you're well aware of District 3, you know it's a big part of San Bernardino County, and I actually think it's the hardest part of San Bernardino to manage. We've got urban areas, we've got mountains, and we've got deserts. Most of the other districts are either just urban areas, or in the case of District 1, which is the northern part of that map, it's mostly desert. So this is a really challenging region because we've got different geographies, different neighborhoods, and totally different needs. So you already know San Bernardino County is the biggest county in the entire US, and we are about half the geography of the whole county, so it's a big place. We've talked before about the huge budget we have and the fact that so much of it comes from the state and the federal government. And it's really important to me here that as part of this supervisor role, we are looking at each geography in District 3, and even going more specific than geography and looking at each town and saying what policies are going to be the best suited to these particular towns. Because we know people who have, well, we have friends who own small businesses up here. We've actually evaluated opening a small business of our own, and we know that the county tends to apply a one-size-fits-all approach to everything, and it's really hard in a place like this that's so diversified. So, in terms of my county-wide priorities of elected to this seat, I think about, there are obviously plenty more to talk about, but I want to start with these four. Financial responsibility, diversifying our economy, our relationship with the government, and restoring faith and trust between the residents and our local government. Financial responsibility is an area I think our county has really struggled with. If you read the paper here, it's hard to go a couple weeks without seeing some kind of headline that alleges financial misconduct, corruption, or as the case was today, the county of San Bernardino is being sued by the state of California along with a couple other counties and property developers. Like, these headlines here are all too common. We also have a former county chief executive officer that completely ran amok of this place. He was bullying department heads. He was the one responsible for returning the federal homeless funding we're talking about here. And generally, we just haven't seen a whole lot of financial discipline or rigor in this county. And this is something that is really in my core skill set, and something that's, I think a really important priority that should be on all of our minds. Because if we're wasting less money as a county, we all have more money to go around, and our tax dollars are being spent more efficiently. Who's familiar? I assume everyone's familiar with the adage of not putting all your eggs in one basket. I kind of think that's what's happening with our economy overall in San Bernardino. This is why if you spend some time on our website, you'll see a lot of content around warehouses, transport, and logistics. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with this business, but I think the problem is our county leadership has spent too much time focusing on just this one sector. It is by far the biggest employment category in San Bernardino County, and I think we're on the cusp of a real problem here, because one, the next time the economy takes a turn, I think it's going to be an issue because this sector will dip. But almost more importantly, we're on the cusp of a big technological revolution where a lot of these jobs are the first in line to get replaced with automated technology. So we've got warehouses that are being built next to schools and churches, really taking over neighborhoods. And I think it's going to be a real problem when these jobs start to go away. And because our economy is so focused on transport and logistics, it's going to be a big problem for all of us here in San Bernardino County when that starts to happen. Our tax revenue is going to go down and we are going to struggle. And this is not the first time this has happened in this county. If you go back over history, military bases have closed, rail yards have closed, and it's meant long times of bust for the city and county of San Bernardino. And I think we need to focus on fixing this problem before it's too late. So one of my priorities as supervisor is to go out, evaluate some opportunities, some other areas of investing, getting businesses to invest in San Bernardino County and bringing a more diversified economy to this county. Our relationship with the state and federal government, I think now is kind of at an all-time low. And that's a problem because this is our biggest single source of funding. So I don't want to sound like a broken record because I talk about this a lot, but I think the way that we've been dealing with our state government, as for instance, by threatening secession to try to get more resources, is a totally misguided approach. I think the idea is right in terms of let's find ways to get more resources from the state of California, but I think threatening to secede from the state as a way of doing it is a pretty cheap bargaining tactic. And quite frankly, it hasn't worked. So one of the things I'm focused on here is finding positive ways to engage with the state to get us more resources. So for instance, I was actually reading an article today about how the state of California, there's been a big federal grant. The state of California received $100 million to electrify some of its school bus fleet. If you see me talk in person, one of the things I talk about a lot is wanting to use our dominance in transport and logistics to try to bring about some positive change. One of those things, or one of those ideas, is starting to electrify our heavy vehicle fleet. I think this means good things for residents of San Bernardino County. We already have the worst air quality in the entire world. Big trucks are big NOx emitters. That contributes to the ozone levels we have here. So starting to electrify these trucks is a good idea, but it's going to cost money. Looking at this article today, we know there is funding to be received from the state of California and the federal government if you do the right things. And I think if we approach these situations with some positivity and go to the state and say, hey, we want to start cleaning up our dirty air, but we need some funding to do it, I think that's a more productive conversation than threatening secession. Last, I want to restore trust between the residents of this county and the local government. One of the things that became clear to us when we moved here full time is that this seems to be at an all-time low. People talk pretty openly about the allegations of corruption and financial misconduct in this county. The county is huge. A lot of the county is, in terms of the geography, is unincorporated. Residents slip through the cracks. There is a feeling of your voices not being heard, which I obviously sympathize with. This is one of my main reasons for running. Look at what happened last winter in the snowstorms. And I think the other thing I've noticed in my dealings with the county is there also tends to be this not my problem approach, where you go to the county and say, hey, I need my road fixed, or I need something done with my trash collection or whatever it is. And they're very quick to say, oh, that's the state's problem, or that's a rule that we didn't pass, so sorry, not our problem. They might not be technically wrong, but I think that's a pretty poor way of dealing with residents. And I think if we can start to work more collaboratively with some of these other state agencies, we can do a better job of taking care of people. So one of the ways in which I think we can start to bring this kind of change about is by expanding the network of MAC committees here. If you don't know what a MAC is, it's a municipal advisory committee. And as we understand it, there used to be more of them historically than there are today. And there's another problem with them that I've seen, which is, in addition to there being fewer MAC committees, they're also more politically motivated. Certainly some of the people that we've seen sit on some of the ones here don't seem to have the real issues of residents at heart. So I'm not going to talk about it now, but I've got some ideas on how we can both expand the max and also make them less politically minded, so that as the government of San Bernardino County, we are getting better feedback from local residents on what kind of problems are important to them. Because, like, let's not forget, this is a big place, and it's really easy for a resident all the way in Needles to feel like the government doesn't have their back if they're not listening. So today we're talking specifically about the East Desert communities. I've got local priorities for all the various regions of San Bernardino County's District 3. Here are the first four I want to talk about. This certainly isn't an exhaustive list, and I'm really curious and keen to get your feedback as well on what's important to you. STRs, you've heard me talk about this before. If you've seen my YouTube video on this, you'll know that it's my firm belief that they're a relevant part of a tourist economy. We do need them in certain parts of this county, but they should be governed in some way. So some things I think we need to consider are a sensible cap on the number of STRs. I'm a big believer that we should restrict corporate ownership in some way, because I think it's a problem as a neighborhood if 50 houses in a neighborhood are all owned by one corporation. And one of the things I feel most passionately about is that the revenue generated by STRs should stay in the area where they're located. Right now, the way it works, all the money that's generated from STR fees or the occupancy tax gets put in the county's general fund, and there's no requirement that money is spent in our local communities. As a resident in a mountain part of District 3, we're a tourist economy, we have STRs, so we both need them, but I'm also very, very well versed in some of the problems that they cause. And I think a big thing that we can do to start to alleviate some of these problems is by keeping this funding back in the local communities, reinvesting it, investing more in code enforcement so that we minimize these problems as much as possible. Conservation. I think a lot of us live in rural parts of San Bernardino County because we love the rural character. That's certainly a huge reason why I'm up here in the mountains. I've seen a lot of drama, I suppose, in recent months and recent years on all kinds of projects, whether that's renewable energy, like large-scale renewable energy projects being proposed right next to rural communities, or in the case of the Mojave Desert, the Cadiz Water Project, extracting water, like ancient water reserves from well under one of the driest deserts on Earth. I want you to know I'm a big proponent of renewable energy, and I think we need more of it in this county. But I also think there are ways to start to develop this that don't even come close to touching the natural landscape. For instance, we have 1 billion square feet of warehouse roof space in the Inland Empire. They're actually supposed to, by requirement, have solar panels installed on a decent percentage of them. Most of them right now aren't even in compliance with that. So we've got a huge opportunity, before we even think about building anything on land. And then when we get there, we have a whole lot of disturbed land in this county. The I-15 corridor is a big example of that. So yes, renewable energy is a huge focus for me, but I think we have so many opportunities to do it in areas that don't even come close to impacting a rural landscape. On water, I think one thing we need to do, not just in this county, but as a society, is focus more on water preservation and conservation. So I've got a lot of personal experience with this. I live in a little village in the San Bernardino Mountains. We have a small municipal water company. We lose a huge percentage of our water every year just due to leaks and poor investment in infrastructure. I think it's not crazy to assume that a lot of little water companies are in the same position. So I think if we focus our county's resources on maintaining, improving infrastructure, before we evaluate drilling new wells and extracting water that doesn't need to be extracted, let's try to keep what we already have. Preserving community. We've kind of touched on this through these other points, but I think the rural character of San Bernardino County is one of the things that makes it great, and I think we need to preserve it as much as possible. If you're in the desert, you might have heard or seen me speak out about some of the, against some of the proposed commercial glamping developments that have been proposed in the middle of rural areas. Look, this is a big county, and I think we have room for some of this stuff, but we need to be really, really careful about where we're putting it. I mean, I live in the mountains for a quiet, comfortable life, and I certainly don't want to live next to a hotel, and I really, really empathize with people in the same position in all parts of this district. And one thing, kind of like I suggested on, on evaluating issues, on giving you my real opinion on stuff. One thing I want you to do when you're evaluating which candidate you want to support here is really look at who has been showing up for you and who has been speaking their mind about stuff. Lastly, but certainly not least, is representation for unincorporated communities. This is a huge part of my why for running. We live in an unincorporated part of San Bernardino. We rely directly on the county for all of our basic resources. We've seen firsthand how difficult the county has made life for residents, whether that's, again, opening businesses, renovating your house, what have you. I really think it's time that we have a representative on the Board of Supervisors who lives in an unincorporated part of the county and who can really empathize with what it's like to be an unincorporated resident. So even though, if you're in the desert, even though I don't live in the desert full time, I know exactly the problems you face because we face our mountain version of those problems day in, day out up here. So know that you have my full support and my full empathy on what it's like to be an unincorporated resident in this county. So just to go through and sum up and give you some key points to take home. In terms of finances, I'm the most qualified candidate to make sure that your tax dollars are being spent effectively. I've spent a lot of time in our county's budget. I've seen a lot of the money that, in my opinion, we're wasting on some pointless activities, and I think we can do a lot more with the resources we have. And I think we're going to need to do that because the state of California just announced a $68 billion budget deficit. So getting more resources from California is going to be harder than ever, and we need to make sure we're doing the best with what we've already got. One of the things that you'll probably hear other candidates talk about is experience in government or experience with a particular type or a particular department. I think one of the things I bring to the table here is the fact that my professional background and my skill set means that I am well suited to not necessarily looking at each one of these departments individually, but knowing that I can look across this entire collection of county departments, figuring out quickly what makes those work and knowing how and when to allocate resources to make those better. That was literally my professional job for over a decade. That is something I know how to do really, really well. And like I said, a core part of that skill set is figuring out things quickly and responding in real time. And on that point, I think I am, thus far from what I've seen, I've been the only candidate that responds with some kind of urgency to all these issues. I've done it with the STR issue. If you follow the campaign on social media, you'll see me talk every couple days about some kind of issue or another that's going across this county and giving you my real take on it and my actual opinion. I want you to know exactly how I'm going to behave when I'm in that seat. And last but not least, I think politics is a combination of technical skills and know-how, which I have from my former career, and empathy. District 3 is a huge place. We've got these various regions. We've got people of all kinds of backgrounds. We've got mountain towns, desert towns, cities. I've spent some time in so many of these different environments. So even though I live in the mountain part of San Bernardino, I can really empathize with what it's like to be a resident across so many parts of this district. And know that even if I don't live in the desert, you have my full support and empathy because a lot of the problems that you face, we face a slightly different version of that problem up here in the mountains. So with that, let's swap over to Q&A. So do we have any questions in the chat?
No, but it might be worth talking about trash.
Yeah, okay, so one of the issues that you are going to see us put out a formal piece of content on in the next few days is trash collection. I know particularly in the desert, given some of the statewide legislation that's getting pushed through, the way trash gets sorted and collected is changing for a lot of people, and I know that the county hasn't done a great job of communicating those changes and making them necessarily relevant to people who live in unincorporated parts of the county. I think there's a real opportunity here for things should have been done better. Things should have been communicated more clearly to residents. And we're going to put out as a campaign a full opinion piece on the issue and know exactly where we're coming from. But know that you do have my full support and empathy on the trash collection issue. I mean, we're in a rural part of the county. We have to take our trash to the dump like a lot of you do in the desert. And I know that driving an extra 20 miles or whatever people are proposing seems crazy. And I think this goes back to that point of sometimes the county passing the buck and saying this is a state problem, not the county's problem, or this is a state requirement. We're just don't shoot the messenger. But I don't think that's the most productive way that we can be working through these problems and coming up with a solution that works for everybody. So I think there are things the county could have done. I think there are things the county still should do to make this issue better for people. And we have spoken with people who work in this industry across the county, and it seems as though there have been examples of this legislation actually being handled pretty well by some of the incorporated cities in this county. And if the county actually took the feedback of the cities, we probably wouldn't be in this mess. So look, know that you have my full support and empathy, and this is something that I'm going to talk about in great detail in the next couple days.
So we have a question which you should repeat. Is a question about MACs. Why are there fewer MACs? What happened and why are they important?
Okay, so the question is on MACs. Why are there fewer MACs? What happened and why are they important? I actually don't have the detail on why some of the MACs were disbanded. I know there used to be one in the Joshua Tree Morongo region that doesn't exist anymore. But the reason they're important is this is, in a county this big, this is a way to get direct feedback from residents in a local community about what issues are important to them. So this trash collection issue would have been a really important thing to discuss at a Desert MAC committee. And I think the way to deliver better local services for residents is to have as many of these as we possibly can. And again, back to the point early in the presentation, make sure they're not political. This should be an environment where residents in a local community can come speak their mind, highlight what issues are important to them, and give their feedback. Because I think until you hear from residents and until you know what problems are being faced, you can't possibly legislate or come up with a solution. So again, know that being a resident in a rural part of this county, you have my full empathy here, because I want the government to know what's important to me, and I think the government should know what's important to you.
Okay, another comment is code enforcement is a big focus. We have lots of dumping in the desert, also lots of abandoned houses that catch fire. So can you talk a little bit about how you would beef up code enforcement?
I think this goes hand in hand with keeping, sorry, repeating the question. So talking about lack of code enforcement, how there's a lot of illegal dumping, burning in the desert communities, or burning of trash and houses. Is that the question?
Abandoned houses.
Abandoned houses.
Yeah.
So this goes back to that point of making sure that, looking at STRs as a for instance, because I think code enforcement and STRs are intrinsically linked. I know the code enforcement issues in this question aren't just related to rentals. But they are also very related. I think going back to that point before around keeping the money from STRs in the local regions means that we can have more money available for code enforcement to enforce against some of these problems. And by the way, I know what it's like as a resident to know when the county doesn't show up for you. We, in our local community, we have what is ostensibly a commercial property STR. Has historically caused all kinds of problems, and the county isn't quick to do anything about it. So I think the county is obviously making quite a bit of money on STRs, both through permit fees and also through it's called the TOT tax, the transit occupancy tax. And I think if we start keeping that money in our local communities, beefing up code enforcement, then we'll start to address this problem. I also think with things like dumping and burning of trash, I think this goes hand in hand with trash drop off and collection needs to be made as easy as possible, because if you make people drive too far to dump their trash, then they're just going to dump it on the side of the road. So I think the focus on trash collection and trash drop off should be making it as easy as possible for people.
Do you have any concrete ideas about how to expedite either construction of new or low income housing or conversion of different properties into housing?
Okay, so the question is, do we have any ideas on how to expedite the construction of low-income housing or convert existing housing and rezone it for low-income housing? I think one of the things that we can consider doing as a county is, on the note of expediting the process, is, some kind of fast track approval for low-income housing. I mean, we've seen examples of this county work really quickly when it needs to and really slowly when it doesn't want to work fast. I think if we can come up with a framework of, here is a project that works for low-income housing. If you meet these following requirements, then it will be fast track approved. I think that's a start. I also think we need to be doing a better job of looking at the funding that we've got and making sure that's spent correctly. So I've talked about the $4 million that the county had to return to the federal government because it didn't spend it properly. This was specifically for homeless funding. We saw a headline hit the news today about the county, a property developer, and a couple of other counties being sued by the state of California I'm still doing the research on this, so I'm not going to make any kind of concrete assertions here. But for funding, ostensibly not being spent properly. So for me, this comes down to a couple things. It's coming up with a more fast track approval process, which to my mind also goes hand in hand with, as I think about businesses, houses in our desert communities, in our mountain communities, we need to have some kind of, not necessarily fast track approval process, but we need to take into account the differences in our local geographies here. I think if you're in a rural part of San Bernardino County and you've tried to pull a permit for something, you'll know that things are very heavily focused on life in a city. And I think we need to really acknowledge that life in the mountains and life in the desert is not life in the city, and we need to do what we can to make pulling those permits easier and faster. So yeah, fast track approvals, let's do a better job with the money we've got, and not give it back because we haven't spent it properly.
Just talk 10 seconds about how a lot of those regulations are written in the development code, and that's what's geared towards cities.
Oh yeah, the point being that a lot of these regulations are written in the development code, which is highly geared toward life in the city. And obviously we have to be conscious of the fact that you have statewide development code that you can't necessarily override. But what we found firsthand, being residents up here in the mountains and talking to people in the desert, is you can get exceptions made for stuff. So for the right things, I think we need to focus on making the exception the rule rather than the exception, and making it easier to get some of these permits.
Also maybe mention the relationship with the state and the federal government, because there are a lot of grants available for this kind of building.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the positive relationship that we need to rebuild with the state of California and the federal government, because there is a lot of money that we're leaving on the table. Whether it's returning this homeless funding or just, the news today kind of highlights this example. I think it's going to be harder for us to get this funding if the state of California, quite frankly, isn't trusting us with it. So I think if we rebuild the relationship, we'll start to see more of this money come in. Okay, look, thank you everyone for taking the time on a Wednesday night to join. Like I said, this is just the first one of these, kind of our soft launch, our trial run. If you found this useful, then please let your friends know. We are going to post a full schedule of events by the end of tomorrow. We're going to aim to do 3 a week, where we'll do one for the mountains, one for the desert, and one for cities. So please spread the word, let people know to come. If you found it useful, also follow the campaign on social media. Like I said, we're very active. We talk a lot about these local issues, and we give firm opinions on what we think. So the campaign is at Smith for SB on pretty much whatever platform you follow. And of course, it's always the final last call. This is a completely grassroots campaign. If you are at all interested in supporting, there's a QR code on the presentation, and there's also a donation link button on the website. So anything there is gratefully received. Please feel free to touch base if you've got any questions at all. We're also doing plenty of in-person stuff too. So the schedule is going to be virtual events midweek and then in-person Friday to Monday. So stay tuned on social media for the schedule, and we hope to see you either back here online or in person very, very soon. Cool. Thanks everyone. Good night and have a good rest of your evening.